President Joe Biden has come under heavy criticism for traveling to Delaware for the holiday weekend amid the crisis in Afghanistan. The president was scheduled to visit his hometown of Wilmington, Delaware 2 weeks ago but had his trip pushed back due to the withdrawal from Afghanistan and Hurricane Henry. But after touring the devastation of Hurricane Ida in Louisiana, Biden decided now was time to take a break back home for the holiday weekend. The move was slammed by Republicans who called the president out for flying home in the midst of the crisis in Afghanistan, where hundreds of citizens and allies have been left behind, due to the botched withdrawal and evacuation from the country. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows tweeted, "American citizens are still stranded behind enemy lines in Afghanistan, and meanwhile Joe Biden is vacationing in Delaware." Joe Biden left Americans hostage in Afghanistan. No speech, press release, or Biden family vacation in Delaware can change that. Alabama Representative Mo Brooks also pointed to the Americans who were left behind. He tweeted, "Joe Biden will be spending his weekend on vacation in Delaware. Roughly 100 Americans will be spending their weekend abandoned in Afghanistan." New York Congresswoman Claudia Tenney denounced Biden's trip home while calling for him to be held accountable for the $85 billion of military equipment that was left behind in Afghanistan. She posted, "Joe Biden is a career politician who's only ever worked in D.C. For the rest of us, we are responsible for the equipment we use at work. If we lose it, we pay for it. Biden lost $85 billion in military equipment and then left for vacation. Congress must hold him accountable." Republicans also mentioned other issues that the country is facing, including migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border and the residents of New Orleans who are still left without power. Karine Jean-Pierre, White House Deputy Press Secretary, said on Friday that Biden was dealing with different multiple crises. "But, this is the role of the president, right? To make sure that we keep working. We have addressed multiple crises at the same time," she said. On Thursday, Senate Republicans accused the White House of evacuating thousands of Afghans from the country while leaving American citizens and allies behind. Secretary of State Antony Blinken admitted that up to 200 Americans are still stranded in Afghanistan even though the last U.S. flight left the country a day before the evacuation deadline. "We believe there are still a small number of Americans, under 200 and likely closer to 100, who remain in Afghanistan and want to leave," he said in a speech at the State Department Monday night, with remarks delayed for more than 2 hours. The number was somewhat lower than estimates in the final hours as the Biden administration's troop withdrawal deadline approached. He said about 6,000 Americans had been flown out of the country or departed in an airlift of 123,000 people. "A new chapter of engagement with Afghanistan has begun," the nation's top diplomat proclaimed. "The military mission is over. A new diplomatic mission has begun," he proclaimed. But he vowed to use diplomacy and leverage to bring out any Americans, allies, or Afghanis who assisted the U.S. and want to leave, as critics pounded Biden for allowing the withdrawal before all Americans were out, comparing those who remained to hostages. "We made extraordinary efforts to give Americans every opportunity to depart the country," he said. Blinken said some who stayed were dual citizens and U.S. passports who weren't sure they wanted to go and were trying to decide whether or not they wanted to leave. He said the U.S. and allies plan to hold the Taliban to keep the airport open and allow safe passage. "Any engagement with the Taliban-led government in Kabul will be driven by one thing only, our vital national interests," he said. He also mentioned new ways out, including overland routes, which means driving across Afghanistan's famously inhospitable terrain. This could involve driving east toward Pakistan, the same areas many Taliban members used to find sanctuary during the 20-year U.S.-led war that came to a close a minute before midnight in Kabul. "We're also working to identify ways to support Americans, legal permanent residents, and Afghans who have worked with us who may choose to depart via overland routes," he said. "We have no illusion that any of this will be easy or rapid," Blinken said. calling it an entirely different phase of the evacuation. "We will hold the Taliban to their commitment on freedom of movement," he said, on a day when U.S. forces departed the airport in Kabul, leaving it intact, while scuttling aircraft that were left behind. The Pentagon announced on Monday afternoon that the last American troops had left Kabul airport almost 24 hours ahead of schedule, ending the U.S. war in Afghanistan after 20 years and the deaths of almost 2,500 troops. Witnesses in Kabul said the Taliban let off celebratory gunfire as news circulated that the final U.S.